Well, for those wondering, it's no coincidence that we showed this film on Nehru's birthday. Um, Anand, I suppose the question of when does one become an adult is asked often, and there are legal answers to it. You turn 18, etc. Um, but one of the things that I felt growing up was that the moment you realize your parents' mortality, the moment you're confronted by your parents' mortality, is one of those moments where you actually turn into an adult. Uh, can you talk about that moment, and not just that moment, but also this decision in the late 90s to take the camera and turn it towards your parents? Because you have been making films since the 70s. It took you 20 years to find a protagonist in your parents. Well, not really in a film, though you were making a home movie.
Yeah. Is this on? Yeah. Yeah, so my parents passed away. My mother passed away when I was 58 and my father when I was 60. So so when did I become an adult? May have been then at the age of 60. But no, so what was the
Talk
other
about the
question?
decision in the late 90s where you actually
When
decided
yeah,
to.
so there was no decision at all. It was just that I always had equipment lying at home, um, camera, at least B cameras, if not the main camera, and yeah, I decided that I would film at home. I don't think I made a conscious decision to start filming. I don't remember when it happened, but perhaps the earliest footage that you see in the film is shot by my mother of my uncle Achut Kaka uh, when he was in Chennai. Because my mother also, you know, apart from being a potter, she also liked to. She had her VHS camera and she would shoot things. So she shot that, and then I guess we were all sometime or the other filming at home. Seema was filming, a few other my relatives filmed a little bit, uh, but the bulk was done by Seema and me. And it was never at that when we were actually filming, we were not making a film. So actually, that was a blessing because there's no self-consciousness either on my part about filming, nor is there self-consciousness on the part of my parents about being filmed, because it was just we would watch the footage later on for the family to enjoy. That was it. So the decision to make the film came much later, after they had passed away.
We'll come to that, but uh, at some point, just pointing the camera at your parents turns into pointing the camera at them and miking them up, and then it becomes about.
Yeah. So that was another, in the early part of filming. I was just filming birthdays and family get-togethers and all. They're not actually miking anybody. No sound, no consciousness about soundtrack. But then I started doing interviewing them, and what emerged was oral history of, I knew the sort of broad outlines of what had happened, but not the details. And I got excited by the conversations because I was learning things.
And so this was a moment of discovery for you as well, all of this.
Yeah. I mean, the details of so many things that I knew very vaguely about. And in fact, I really regret not filming my uncles, the main people who fought for the freedom struggle. But I was only 19 when Rao Kaka died, and I was 32 when Achut Kaka died. But I had made Ram Ke Naam already. I had made a lot of films, but I never, for some reason, I didn't force him to speak to me. He never wanted to talk about the old days.
That's the question I had. That even if you stuck a camera in front of his face, would he speak? Because, as we know, a lot of the people who survived partition, they were not very they don't not just about they were quite reluctant to speak about that period. Even in terms of the films that came out, our films in the 50s and 60s barely spoke about partition. It was only the generation that came later which actually investigated not just partition but sort of how trauma cascades through within families, within generations. Do you think you would have spoken? I know this is like a question we don't really have an answer to,
Hard
but
to know, but he wouldn't even speak in terms of normal conversation. Forget about when there was a camera.
Right.
Because by this time he had become a Krishnamurti follower. No?
Right.
So Jiddu Krishnamurti, I mean, they were just about, being in the here and now, and there's no past and future or anything like that. Yeah.
Uh, Anand, we had a conversation about this film and it showed at Mami, and I suppose that was like it was a India premiere, and so this is sort of the first time I think you were showing it to a big audience, and you were quite emotional watching the film, at least in the aftermath of it. Does it become easier with repeat viewings, watching it with more people, having these same conversations, getting asked the same questions, or does
Yeah.
the footage still strike?
Sometimes it's still, it does still strike, but it's, I've watched it hundreds of times with audiences. And I usually watch the audience when not just this film, all my films. I've learned a lot about filmmaking by watching my own films being screened to audiences and seeing which parts people laugh at and which parts, I sort of get a sense of how the film is working.
And watching this with the audience, what is your sense? How have they been reacting to it?
It's a difficult film
In
for
what
me to watch with the audience in the sense that there's too much invested in it. No, it's hard for me to take criticism. Yeah. Yeah.
Anand, there's the political, the personal, and what you've done here is almost create like a switcheroo. You're constantly moving between the personal and the political. Sometimes the personal is political, the political is personal. Talk to me about the decision to take the film all the way to 2019, because your mom passed away in 2008, father in 2010. But you decided that, no, you want sort of the long shadow of their story to reach 2019.
No, again, this is like the film and not just this film, but all my films. People have complained about, its lack of any coherent logic. And it's because it's stream of consciousness. I'm often going off on a tangent and then coming back. And so what happened in 2019, again, I was at that rally, the anti-CAA protest in August Kranti Maidan, very conscious that this is where 42 movement began, in a sense. The independence call was given there. And I didn't go there to make I didn't again go there, I didn't go with the camera. I went to the rally and I filmed that on my phone because I was there. And so I said, I should record this. Again, without necessarily knowing that it was going to be part of anything. Perhaps just to put it on Facebook or something that night. So that's how it ended up, and I extended the story to 2019.
And then during the pandemic, you decided
And
to sit
the other thing I wanted to talk about also is that people, obviously the film, people always say it's personal and political. And it's my most personal film. That's obvious. But at the same time, actually, I think all my films have been personal, even though they are about, I'm not necessarily in front of the camera, but almost in all the films you can hear my voice because I'm doing the camera very often. And I'm doing interviews also. So I'm talking, you can sort of see if you look for it, you can see that all of the films are personal. It's not that this is just the most overtly stated one.
I suppose that's the difference between like your presence.
In the sense that I don't belong to any political party. Government never gives me money to make films. Nobody gives me money to make films. So in the sense that they all come out of my desire to speak about something.
I think when people are calling this your most personal film, it's not, your presence is felt in all your films with your voice and of course your perspective, that's taken for granted. But when they call it personal, I think you're just getting more insights, I suppose, into who you are, your upbringing. It's personal in that sense. Talk to me about holding the camera in moments of extreme personal pain. Because I love that your mother makes a distinction at one point between Anand Patwardhan, the great filmmaker, and Anand Patwardhan, my son. Do you see that distinction sometimes, and do you feel you've pursued the one at the cost of the other?
Not really, no. By the way, I should, Sima is here, who's also one of the camera people. Yeah, why
Of
don't
course,
you?
yeah. Should we add another chair, please? Come on, Seema, join us.
Join the conversation. Pratyush, you're not prepared to ask me questions.
I'm more than
first.
prepared to ask you questions, Seema. Come on.
Now I have to think of a question to ask me, otherwise I'll be sitting there.
This is Simantini. You would have seen her in a lot of the footage. She's also shot a lot. Can you talk a little bit more about this distinction between Anand Patwardhan, the filmmaker, and Anand Patwardhan, the son, especially in moments where you're holding the camera, in moments where you feel like maybe you shouldn't be holding the camera? I know in interviews you've mentioned that it helped you in those difficult moments.
Yeah, no, but I'll come to the point where my mother says what she said. And it's, at that moment in time, my mother had cancer. And it was something that, in a way, she must have been dreading because even Nandita Kriplani, who was Tagore's granddaughter, who was they were like the guardians of my mother when she was in Shantiniketan, also died of cancer. So she lost a lot of people that way. And so she was, and she didn't like getting old at all. Unlike my father, who could be fine at every age. He was completely a Sufi about everything. But my mother didn't adjust to old age and being sick. So she was already irritated with life at that moment in time. So that shows there. Yeah, but we've always, we've in a sense had grudges between us, family grudges, in the sense that my grudge with her, which she knew about, was also that at the time when I needed her most, I was sent to boarding school because she was busy being a potter, traveling all over the world and stuff like that. Yeah, but we loved each other very much, as you can see in the film. So,
Seema, I have to ask you this question because in this film, the beautiful thing is that you keep moving between the observer and the observed. Sometimes you're wielding the camera, sometimes you're on the other side of the camera. And of course, these were not, when you all were shooting it, you all didn't know you all were making a film. But can you talk about the presence of the camera and how you have negotiated this movement around it?
No,
For decades.
As Anand said, it was never a conscious thing. I mean, it became somewhat conscious, and that also, even when he wanted to record people, in a sense, asking them about what happened during the younger days. It was not really from the point of view of making a film. It was from the point of view of preserving that
recording
period.
history, yeah.
Because if you notice, Papa, yes, he talked about, and a little bit Mummy, when they talked about their youth. But Madhu Kaka, particularly, we started talking to him, and the other Madhu Kaka,
that's my father's
friend,
youngest brother,
were people, because by then we had lost that generation, and there was very few people left. So it was that. But I mean, to answer your question, yeah, it was never conscious. I mean, that you can see in the film, it was never a conscious thing to be in and out of the frame.
Then Anand, at what point do you look at all of this and say, I want to make it into a film? And what extra labor does that involve?
Well, partly the extra labor lay in how to turn this very grainy footage shot on very low-grade equipment over 20 years ago and 25 years ago and make it presentable visually. So we did use AI technology to sharpen the image and enhance so that the audience doesn't get lost in the technology of it. you can see sometimes the screen becomes wider and then smaller, depending on what camera was used when. So there was a lot of technical stuff that took a lot of time. But conceptually, I can't tell you exact moment when I thought that now this is something. I guess maybe subconsciously I knew that what I was doing was useful, but it was not a decision to make a film as such.
But during the pandemic, you decided, I suppose,
Pandemic
right?
was when I had the time and I was stuck at home and then was looking at old footage and then started editing, yeah.
Anand, what is your relationship with nostalgia?
With nostalgia?
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain that, but to me the value of what there is in this film is that it's a little step against the rewriting of history. Because our history is being seriously rewritten. You could make out even in the sequence where I'm talking to the school kids, when somebody is saying Gandhi, a little boy is convinced that Gandhi is the cause of partition. Now you can't, I'm sure that if you did a survey, a majority of people in our country actually think that now. Because they didn't live in those times and they don't necessarily have connection with people who lived in those times to know what had happened. So I think for me the value of what's in this film is that it's a blow against the rewriting.
That it is. Also about coherence, I want to know what your thoughts are, because you keep talking about how your films are being critiqued in a certain way for not being coherent. But is coherence something that we need to even think about sometimes?
Coherent in the sense that none of my films follow a kind of linear logic. They're all over the place because they're following a stream of consciousness kind of editing that I do, if I have to describe it. One thought leads to the other, and even on the screen.
And it gives a very strange, because this is, I think, the third time watching the film, and I realized that, right after the CA protests.
But sorry, I just want to. There is and there isn't coherence, but actually I am telling a story. Like, so what is the story that I'm talking? I'm telling the story of partition in a sense, and the fact that this idea people don't have, that the majority of Muslims actually were against partition. Very few people seem to remember that now. And it is because the British only gave the vote to the elite Muslims who were afraid that their property is going to be taken over by the Congress party that was claiming to be socialist. And so the fear of that made them choose Pakistan, while the working class Muslims were not asked. And so there's that thread that runs through the film, and you come to it in different ways.
I have more questions.
Like the children that I bumped into in Ahmednagar, the Muslim boy and the Hindu boy, if you remember that sequence. Again, it's so much to do with what we are told and not what we actually see in front of our eyes.
In that scene, you also intervene, though, which I find very interesting as a filmmaker.
I often intervene. Yeah.
So it's both observation and intervention, archiving. It's all, you don't think of it as separate.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes my films are called cinema verite, which is absolutely wrong, because of cinema verite is like a fly on the wall that observes. Right. But my films don't. Sometimes they just observe, but sometimes I'm leading the conversation.
So in that case, I want to end with a quote, and this is a quote from Nehru, because I was rewatching the Sham Benegal documentary in the morning, the Nehru 1, 2, 3, 4. Democracy and socialism are means to an end, and not the end itself. We talk of the good of society. Is this something apart from transcending the good of the individual composing it? Let's have faith in the country and ourselves. Let's all become partners in this great enterprise of building a new India. So to the future, to Anand, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.